Well, joining me to discuss this story in more depth is the diversity expert, Vernal Scott. Good morning, Vernal.
Good morning.
The Prime Minister of Italy, Matteo Renzi, has called this slavery of the 21st century, obviously referring to the human smugglers, and also a plague on our continent, meaning that this situation is unlikely to improve because of the dire situations in Africa and the Middle East.
Not only am I distressed by this event, or these events, I'm angry about it too. You know, I think that where I get the impression that black lives are disposable. It's reminiscent of what we heard about slavery and the slave trade and ships of black people sinking and them being disposable. I would like to see every conscious government get together and decide what it's going to do about this. It's unacceptable to have 700 people drown this week, and last week, you know, just about half that number. Something needs to happen in the way of a plan, a strategy, not just dealing with the migrants on the ships, but at the source. You know, it must be pretty desperate for you to say to yourself, I am going to risk my life to get away from the situation I'm in because it's going to be worth it.
There are a number of factors here, aren't there? So obviously you have the conflicts where these people are trying to escape, where those governments on home territory need to do something about it. So particularly, let's say, for example, in Libya, which has been in turmoil since the removal of Gaddafi.
Yes.
Then you have the exploitation of these people by human traffickers who obviously have a very large network. They work together. It costs very little for them to put people on board, but as a revenue spinner, it's a huge amount of money. And then, of course, you have the EU as a whole. There are only 5 member states that are being targeted by people trying to escape when there are 28 within the European Union. And the Pope saying, you know, we all need to do more. But for the taxpayer, this is what, you know, this is, for example, in Italy, people are funding the ability to look after people. It's going to be very difficult to get governments on side, isn't it? It is political suicide to say to voters, we need to take responsibility for these people's lives.
Well, I think it's the decent thing to do. You know, it's the humane thing to do. It's repugnant. It's unacceptable for people to die in these amounts of numbers and for governments to find something else that's a greater priority.
What's the first thing that needs to be done,
a plan.
do you think?
There needs to be a meeting of heads of government. They need to come up with a strategy for the migrants themselves and the dispersal of the migrants so that they are looked after, they're fed, they're clothed, and that there's a plan for the way forward for them, but also a plan dealing with the source. You know, why are these people so desperate? Unless you deal with that desperation, this problem is going to continue. What's unacceptable is to do nothing. If it was oil, if it was money, if there was something else in it for governments, then, you know, we would see troops being you know, sent out to deal with this.
But isn't that half the problem, that many of these war-torn countries and conflicts, the situation is about oil, it is about politics, and that's probably why the conflict continues without it being resolved, because it's about, you know, potentially Western governments wanting to be able to carve up much of Africa, which has left it in an unstable position. So maybe that is why the situation hasn't improved. Do you think perhaps that we need to look at, rather than, you're not going to wave a magic wand and solve the conflict overnight?
It doesn't need a magic wand, it just needs a plan.
Do you think perhaps the best way forward is to try and get a coordinated approach in how we rescue these people and how we actively organise and maybe not necessarily control, but in a measured way, allow people to come over? That way you take the power out of the hands of the smugglers. You also then have a chance to safely allow people to come away from a conflict situation while sharing the burden across Europe.
Well, you know, my attitude is, if you can deal with Hussein, if you can deal with Gaddafi, if you can deal with Osama bin Laden, you can deal with the traffickers. If you want to, it's about intention. There isn't the intention at the moment to deal with the traffickers, and that's got to happen. You know, people aren't stupid. We know that when there's intention, real intention on the part of government, things get done. It's unfortunate, but it's acceptable at the moment for these people to die. And people like myself and good, decent people out there know this is wrong, and we are going to challenge our governments and say, what are you doing? Because that's what needs to happen. Decent, ordinary Joan and Joe public need to say to their government, we want you to do something about this, whatever needs to be done, but it's not acceptable for men, women and children to die in those kind of numbers on our TV screens. These people have names, they have loved ones, they're not just statistics. They're not just corpses. These are people, and they're being buried in graves that have no names.
And some of them aren't even being rescued from the sea, those bodies.
Absolutely.
Vernal, thank you very much for your comments. We'll hear more from you from our paper review later.